I am honored to be joined right now by an extremely distinguished panel. Of course, Dr. Judy Mikovits, Kent, forgive me, is it Heckenlively?
Yep, perfect.
There we go. And of course, Larry Klayman. Welcome to the show, everybody. Um, it's, uh, it's an interesting topic that we've got today. Why don't you guys fill us in on exactly what's happening and why we're here right now?
Well, let me set it up and then I'll turn it over to Judy and Kent because they're the experts. I'm the lawyer. Okay. I'm the jockey and they're the thoroughbred racehorses. What
Yes.
happened was that Judy Mikovits and I did an interview on Sinclair, and the interview got into the fact, as Judy has sworn out a sworn affidavit under oath, dealing with how the roots of the coronavirus actually emanated in a laboratory called Fort Detrick, Maryland. This is the same laboratory for the military that actually created the anthrax, which attacked us after 9/11. And Fauci had a role to play in that. It was sent over to China because certain types of research could not be done in this country ethically or legally. Grant money was given to that Wuhan lab in China. And the likelihood is that it was turned into a bioweapon and released either accidentally or by design, basically destroying the world. I mean, to put it most succinctly. But I'm going to turn it over to Judy because what happened after that was the left, the radical left, first Media Matters, which is funded by George Soros, which, tries to knock out anything that conservatives or libertarians or anybody who isn't radical left has to say. And then CNN came in, the least trusted name in news. I call it the Communist News Network. And they went after Judy, they went after me, and they had no facts to refute anything. And they're getting sued. I'm actually preparing the complaint. I'm taking a little break here to be on your show, Jason, because they accused Judy of presenting false information, conspiracy theories. They had no evidence, much less any information to refute anything she said. And they accused me of having a history of pushing false information, misinformation. And they couldn't cite one instance. The only thing they cited after I asked them to come up with it was the fact that I had sued the Obama administration over Ebola when Obama was letting people in with Ebola from Africa. I called it with reckless endangerment. That's not a false fact. So anyway, CNN's going to get what they deserve. They're going to be sued. And Judy, meanwhile, is out there and, she's sworn to what she has to say under oath. And I'm going to put that up on Freedom Watch's website. But I want her to explain it, and Ken as well, because they're two great authors. They are groundbreaking. They're not afraid like you, Jason, or like me, to tell the truth as they know it. And the American people need to know the real story here. They need to know that, according to Judy and what she's observed when she was working with Fauci, that we sowed the seeds of our own destruction.
Wow. Dr. Judy?
Yeah, so Jason, the conversation with Eric Bowling, which actually took place in Larry's office there, probably mid-June, somewhere around the 17th of June, we were there putting together this declaration or affidavit and did that conversation. Interestingly enough, he began the interview by saying, Dr. Mikovits, do you believe Tony Fauci engineered the SARS-CoV-2 virus? And you've stated it, maybe he said it as a statement, and I corrected it. And I rarely interrupt anybody, but I corrected him and said, no, that's not what I said. I said the natural evolution was accelerated and this virus was manipulated in a lab in a factory from that the cell line factory, Vero E6 monkey kidney cells were originally sent, by Dr. Fauci in that he funded the research and therefore he is in charge. So the Wuhan lab in China wrote in the paper published in Nature Medicine in 2015 at a time when it was illegal to do gain of function studies. And this is what that research is, to be simply stated. In the United States, he funded the research. The cell line was sent from Fort Detrick, from the biosafety level 4 facility there at USAMRIID, the U.S. Army Research Institute of Infectious Disease, and it was right there at the picture you were showing it at Fort Detrick across the baseball field from those DART buildings. So this is the laboratories I worked at the National Cancer Institute, and that USAMRIID is right across this field, a little bit over to the right, my right, your left. At any rate, this the reason why I said that, this was accelerated evolution, and clearly, Fauci was in charge, is because, in fact, as I was alerted by several of my friends, well, Judy, how can you say the virus originated at Fort Detrick if you can buy this cell line Vero E6 from the American Type Tissue Culture Laboratories in Virginia, ATCC, where it's been for sale for more than 20 years. Well, then why did not the Chinese buy the cell line from ATCC? And in fact, I worked with that monkey cell line at Fort Detrick in the 1990s when we were manipulating Ebola strains, again, viruses from bats in that cell line. We know that cell line now in the future to be contaminated or infected, if you will, with XMRVs, the xenotropic murine leukemia viruses that we isolated from people with ME/CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, along with families with autism, prostate cancers, breast cancers, leukemias, lymphoma, idiopathic thrombocytopenia, and other diseases between 2009 and 2011, clearly associating those retroviruses, that family of retrovirus, with those diseases. So what we know now is if they had not gotten those cells from USAMRIID, those cells would likely not be contaminated with other bat viruses, including and the XMRVs. But in fact, we now know that people with COVID-19 have post-viral syndrome, ME/CFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis, that very chronic fatigue syndrome that in 2009 we published in Science was associated with the XMRV infections. It also looks clinically very similar to chronic Lyme disease. There was an entire chapter of our first book about chronic Lyme disease in our first book, Plague. So we put the science together in Plague, and we, proved the science, and our paper and the isolation was confirmed by Lasker Award winner and colleagues, Harvey Alter, in 2010. And all of this research was censored when it was realized that, in fact, the most likely way these viruses got into humans was via injection of contaminated vaccines. And it's not just polio vaccines, it's not just MMR, but in fact, flu vaccines have gamma retroviruses, not from mice necessarily, but this is not what we're saying, and this is not what the data support. So nowhere has, so when the title you had there is accurate, did he engineer COVID-19? That's quite different from engineering SARS-CoV-2, the virus. Clearly, SARS-CoV-2 does not cause COVID-19. And clearly, as I'm asserting, and the data support, and they haven't answered in almost a decade, a single one of the facts shown in both of our books, that anything other than, and in fact, COVID-19 is XMRVs, along with a little HIV, and that's in the sequences of SARS-CoV-2, which you would get from monkey kidney cells, the relative of which is SIV. And the recombinant events are clear to happen in a matter of weeks. Every time you grow and manufacture another batch of viruses in those cell lines, you take on more recombination events. In only 2 weeks in culture, you can generate new strains. That's the entire basis of my assertions.
Now, Dr. Mikovits, for the lay people in the audience, myself included, what is the difference between COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2?
Well, COVID-19 is the disease. The D means disease. We're being told the disease is caused by the caused by the agent, the virus SARS-CoV-2. And yet there are no data to support that. The virus has not been isolated from people who die or are sickened by the disease, as we did in isolating the XMRVs and HIVs from ME/CFS patients and HIV patients, respectively, throughout the 80s and 90s. This work has not been done. It has not satisfied. SARS-CoV-2 has not satisfied the Hill's criteria or Koch's postulates for a causative agent. So everything that's said is not true, and the public is being misled. And more importantly, as Larry filed a lawsuit on June 22nd or 23rd about the masks and the toxicities and dangers of the masks, those susceptible, those with ME/CFS, those with autism, those 6.2% of Americans who are asymptomatic carriers of XMRVs, corroborated in every single study, between 4 and 7% of the population is walking around with XMRVs that can cause severe disease and death. The masks and the vaccines will kill those patients. So that is what I am saying to Tony Fauci. He engineered the disease in order to cover up 3 decades of crimes against innocent victims worldwide.
So I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this is how I characterize it, we think that there's about 4 to 7% of the population which is affected with these XMRVs, okay? The medical establishment tried to make that go away. That was the main attack on Dr. Mikovits. I think what Dr. Mikovits is saying is that 4 to 7% of the population is affected with these retroviruses, and then when they come up against an immune system challenge like SARS-CoV-2, it is causing a cytokine storm in those individuals, which is resulting in the harm and death. Do I have that correct, Judy?
Yeah, in part. So they are infected, but also SARS-CoV-2, because it was manipulated in an XMRV contaminated Vero E6 cell line, as those cell lines from Fort Detrick, where I worked, where Dr. Rossetti worked, for 37 years, and where much of this study was being done, we were accused of our labs being contaminated. It wasn't the labs that were contaminated. It was the cell lines, as many of our cancer cell lines are contaminated with many strains of XMRVs. And this is the work of 2011 of Adi Gazdar's, the late Adi Gazdar from Texas. And he showed how many of the cell lines we use in the manufacture of things like gene therapy, vaccines, biologics, and even the CAR T cell gene therapy have, in fact, contaminants of XMRVs. So yes, those infected, already asymptomatic carriers will be the first to die from a SARS-CoV-2 infection, but the contamination can in fact be part of COVID-19, that there's more than one thing in that virus. Nobody's isolated it away from the other viruses, shown it to cause the disease. That's Hill's criteria and Koch's postulate.
Let me get this clear too. Let me just interject, Dr. Mikovits. Judy.
Yeah.
The bottom line is that Fauci was responsible for sending the seeds of COVID-19 to the Chinese.
Correct.
Okay.
And as we understand it, this was done because of all the regulatory paperwork and things that you would need to do within the United States when dealing with these type of dangerous compounds.
Actually, it's even worse than that. This gain of function research was looked upon as being so dangerous that the United States forbid it to be done in the United States in 2014. There was a great discussion among scientists about, when they study viruses, why are we making them more dangerous? And possibly letting one of these things escape. I think what was most terrifying in the Nature article from 2015, I believe, where they announced they had been able to take this bat coronavirus and make it infect human cells, is in the discussion itself. They said many have expressed concerns that if this gets out, it could be a pandemic. Reading that, 5, 6 years old data and looking at our world today is just terrifying. And I think our book, Plague of Corruption, even though it doesn't deal a single bit with COVID-19, everybody sees the pattern of lies and deception that has happened in medicine. And that's why our book has taken off. I mean, it's been on the New York Times bestseller list for 5 weeks. It was, for a week, the #1 book on all of Amazon worldwide.
Wow.
And the fact that Judy is being so viciously silenced is just remarkable to me, because every medical person I see on television today, I would put up Judy's background as a scientific researcher against all of them, because none of them has the depth of experience that Dr. Mikovits has. And, I understand it's not just the Sinclair situation, it's so many situations. When we were putting together our marketing plan for A Plague of Corruption, I actually paid a lot of money to a publicist who always gets his clients on Fox, NBC, CBS, ABC. He couldn't do a damn thing to get us onto those shows. So I really am so appreciative of the forum that you've given us, because we want to debate. We're not one of these people who say it's our way or the highway. We would like to sit down and have a public debate with Tony Fauci, with Bill Gates. We'll talk to these people at any time, any place that they want to, but all they do is run away and hide from us.
I have a feeling they fear that debate. Sorry, Larry, real quick. Kent, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it the case that Dr. Fauci's wife, Christine Grady, is the head of bioethics at the NIH or CDC?
For human experimentation, which, when I heard that his wife, who's about a foot taller than he is, I heard that she is the head of human bioethics. I just thought, I wonder what it's like going to a dinner party at their house. Do you sit there worrying, hey, did Fauci's wife put something in the food? Is it poison? Is she gonna slip me some drug and see if I start talking crazy?
Maybe they should have had her throw the first pitch out for the Washington Nationals baseball, because apparently Fauci kind of failed at that one. But let me ask this question, because this is important. Now, why is it? I can give you my view as a public interest lawyer, advocate, private lawyer, radio talk show host, columnist, author. But why is it that the left has deified Dr. Fauci? Why have they turned him into their Muhammad? I don't want to equate Fauci to Jesus, believe me, Messiah. Why have they done that? Okay, they've done it because he's allowing them to destroy not just the health of the American people, but our economy, to take President Trump down, to seize control of this country. They have no interest in Fauci, in my view. I mean, Fauci to them is just a tool, much like Black Lives Matter is to the radical leftists with regard to what's going on today and rioting in the streets. So why is it that CNN went after him? They actually went after Dr. Mikovits and me. They actually advertised their outrage campaign to try to destroy her reputation and mine. Of course, they're getting their complaint very shortly. But let's talk about that.
Well, Larry, I'm really upset because while the media has gone after you and Judy, they've done nothing to me. I'm saying, what am I? What,
Chopped liver?
what am I, chopped liver? I'm part of this team too. Why haven't I been attacked? I got three things to say about Fauci, which I think your audience will find, kind of shocking. First of all, Tony Fauci is 79 years old, okay? He looks pretty good for his age, but my God, he is 79 years old. He has been in charge of his agency for the past 36 years. J. Edgar Hoover headed up the FBI for 38 years, okay?
Wow.
I think it's just shocking to Americans to see that there's some guy who's a political power player who can stay in power that long through both Republican and Democratic administrations. So I think it's wrong to underestimate Fauci as a political player. Secondly, I was just reviewing some information today that Fauci, in addition to being head of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, has his name on 1,300 scientific papers. Now, he's a busy little guy, but let me tell you what happens when you've been in government science for 40 years, like Dr. Mikovits' colleague Frank Ruscetti, who is incredibly prolific. He has a little over 300 publications. So how is it that Fauci, in addition to posing and as the cover boy for InStyle magazine, also gets to be have 1,300 papers, and he runs an agency and everything. The other thing is, and I don't have an answer to this, but it has been asked, and I think it's a legitimate question. And so I ask anybody who likes to research things and has a knowledge of how to find information out. Fauci's name is on a number of patents for various medical products and everything. And what he claims is that all of the money from his patents goes to charity. I would like to see that information because I have a suspicion that he's taken a pretty darn good cut. As I heard it, he's something like the third highest paid federal employee in the entire system.
Wow.
So Fauci, I think, has a lot of dirty stuff, but when you're 36 years in charge of science, because one of the things that, as an attorney, I'm always looking at systems. And, you think that science is set up as multiple centers of inquiry, but it's really a pyramid. And to understand what's gone on, you need to see Tony Fauci at the head of that pyramid. Because if you look at how it should have actually been set up with the coronavirus task force, Dr. Fauci is not at the top of the pyramid of public health. That person is Francis Collins, who, if you've ever seen him, he looks like a big friendly dog who doesn't know where he is. So why is the number two guy, appearing in front of the cameras, and the number one guy, as far as I can see it, is somewhere in witness protection? I really don't understand it. But when you can be at the head of all of that federal money going out into science, you can pick and choose your winners. You can see who is going to toe the line, who, like Dr. Mikovits, is going to be independently minded. And here's the thing that just absolutely drives me crazy when I look at what's going on. When I look at the group who's in control of public health, what I see is a bunch of old gray men in their late 70s, early 80s. And here is a dynamic, intelligent woman, Dr. Mikovits, who could argue any single one of them under the table. So how does this group of corrupt old boys club of science silence Dr. Mikovits? How do they beat her intellectually? I mean, science is supposed to be about having argumentations with data. I mean, Dr. Mikovits can talk to you for 5 hours about data. I mean, in working with her, I've said, hey, you know, we have to simplify it, Judy. But she could talk any one of these guys under the table, and that is why they flee from her like a bunch of cowards. And the only thing they can do is say, "Don't listen to Judy. Don't
Right.
you, don't let your
Yeah.
ears be
Well, you know,
polluted
I
by this
hope,
woman."
Ken, I hope that this interview with Jason, who's a truth teller, he's one of the few people out there that allows for the truth to be told. I hope that it will get to the president. The president obviously does not like Fauci. He does not trust Fauci, but he's being told by his half-wit advisors to compliment Fauci from time to time. And that's not doing him a service either, because he has a new message every day, and the people are completely confused. So I hope that he will meet with Judy and meet with you and read the book, maybe get him the audio version, because he probably doesn't have much time, and educate him that he's being led down the primrose path to not just his political destruction, but potentially the destruction of this country.
You know, Larry, I just downloaded the audio version, and I think it's very important for people to go over to Amazon.com or perhaps another book retailer that's not controlled by the CIA and purchase the book, Plague of Corruption. Yeah, and Kent, you said something very important. Even if people are watching this and thinking, well, you know, Jason's not a scientist, Larry's not a scientist, they might doubt what we're saying, but the fact is, the very nature of science is to constantly be questioning the hypotheses and challenging the conclusions, and the very fact you basically summarized it in your comments. They haven't met with Dr. Mikovits face to face. They've simply used words to smear her. They call her a conspiracy theorist. They say she's discredited, debunked, but they never actually present facts, data, evidence to challenge the facts. I mean, it's like rattling my brain to just even keep up with the facts that she's talking about. And as I look them up, it's all there. So why would they do this if it wasn't for the fact that they're simply unable to disprove what she said?
Here's, Jason, here's the bumper sticker, okay? Here's the one sentence that I believe terrifies them down to the very center of their soul. Vaccines and biologics could carry the same risks as xenotransplantation, okay? Vaccines and biologics.
What is xenotransplantation?
I'm going to tell you that. So xenotransplantation simply means the transferring of any biological material from one species into another species, okay? So let's say you've got a heart valve that's failing. So you get a pig heart valve or a cow heart valve. Okay, well, that's great. It saves your life. But for the rest of your life, you have to go on immunosuppressant drugs because you've got to have this foreign material on there. What they are terrified, and has not been in any single, article about our work, and that this is the central premise of our book, is that vaccines and biologics carry the same risks of viruses as does with xenotransplantation. So let me break it down really simply. Roughly 7 to 8% of our genetic code is silenced viruses, okay, that we've encountered, over millions of years. Well, we have to assume that animals are roughly the same, right? Okay, we've all kind of, all species have been around here for the same, similar amount of time. Okay, but when you transfer that biological material from one species to another, well, what happens is all of those viruses that are silenced can wake up. Like I think the reason that this coronavirus is so devastating to people is because it came from a bat, for God's sakes, okay? Bats have incredibly high metabolism because they're basically little flying rats, okay? So what do you have to do if you're a little rat to fly? You got to have a high metabolism. That means your system is incredibly well tuned to attack viruses, so you can suppress it. But take that virus from an animal that's got a high metabolism and put it into, a species that has a lower metabolism like human beings, and oh my God, that can cause significant harm.
Mm. And you know, we've got a question coming from the comments here for Dr. Mikovits. Do all vaccines have fetal tissue or human DNA in them?
No, Jason, not all vaccines have human fetal tissue DNA, but several of the vaccines have human fetal tissue DNA. And Dr. Sherry Tenpenny and I gave a talk Monday night on John Chambers' Sarasota Patriots, which I'll share with you. And she showed slides showing which vaccines had the human fetal tissue, which vaccines had the animal tissue. And what's really important is often those vaccines are given on the same day to a single individual. So you're mixing
Wow.
to an immune compromise because they're under 3 years old, to immuno-incompetent, we call it host. That's an infant or a baby who has no well-developed immune system. So the opportunity for those to spread to others, to have those recombination events we discussed, it is what, in fact, we discovered in 2011. Really, this what Kent just described so well. You now know why he writes the books with me, because I sound like Judy, and that doesn't read well. So,
But they
But
still
that's
haven't
interesting.
attacked me. When are they going to attack me?
you
Believe
can't
me,
go
you don't
home.
want it.
Maybe you won't be able to go home. But one important thing for Larry here, interestingly, with Eric Bowling, and I appreciate it. I was missing everything Sunday in the conversation, but I appreciated from Eric Bowling's message, in fact, that what he did in that conversation was he took the interview you and I gave him, and he discussed it, where I interrupted him and I corrected him that I did not say Tony Fauci engineered SARS-CoV-2, the virus. I did not say he manufactured it anyway, and I've clarified it as I did at the beginning of this show. Interestingly, he then brought on a doctor from Sloan Kettering in New York, another woman, and I just won't mention her name, and she's there. I'm not going to have her be harmed. But she said exactly this. Actually, what he said to her was, "So, doctor, do you agree?" So Eric Bowling says, "So, doctor, do you agree with Dr. Mikovits that Tony Fauci engineered the virus and sent it to the Chinese?" And every one of my friends, and she said, "No, I don't agree. I don't participate in conspiracy theories." And a friend of 40 years from Frederick, Maryland, tapped me on a text and said, "Judy," and she quoted what I said. And she said, "Aren't you saying the same thing?" And I said, and I said, "Yeah, I think maybe my lawyer Larry's a genius, because everyone in the world, hundreds of people, wrote me and said, you said the exact same thing she did. They called her some kind of fabulous doctor, and they called you a conspiracy theorist." I only discuss data, as Kent knows. Dr. Fauci has never said one word about the data, never refuted it, as Jason, as you just said. Discredited is not disproven.
And
And
I
we
think the other thing,
Hey, let
sorry
me
to interrupt,
interject.
Dr. Mikovits, but I think the other thing for our viewers to be aware of is that when you hear the word conspiracy theory, that's a shortcut for, we don't want you to listen to this person, but we don't actually have anything to say to contest their facts.
Yeah, well, conspiracies do happen. It's only two people that are acting in concert in an overt act to commit an illegal act. Okay, that they do happen. Like I said before in one of your other shows, I used to have a bumper sticker in the kitchen at Judicial Watch that said "Clinton happens." Okay, it does happen. And but here's the irony of this whole thing, is that by the left, the radical left, Media Matters, other groups, CNN, attacking Judy and attacking me and forcing Sinclair to cancel the show. And Eric Bowling just kind of freaked out. I don't blame Sinclair. Okay. I mean, they were dealing with a difficult situation. They were being defamed as well. And, they have evidence that's going to be helpful in my case. But by doing that, they spewed this all over the internet and social media. So now everybody in the world knows that Fauci sowed the seeds by sending those seeds to China. They actually boosted the coverage of this entire thing. And now it's up to people to demand answers to this. And I think the president should play a role here and stop taking conflicting advice from advisors who basically are leading him down the primrose path to his election defeat on November 5th, because he's coming off in a very contradictory way almost every day. He doesn't have a clear message on anything. He needs to hear from people who are really the experts here.
I agree with that, Larry. Yeah, very important.
President Trump, 15 minutes with me and Judy in the Oval Office. We'll straighten this thing out, okay? We promise, and we won't tell anybody that we were there, okay? Got it?
Yeah. Now, Dr. Mikovits, let me ask you really quickly. Early on in the pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, whatever we want to call it, this article in BioRx IV, I'm probably saying that wrong. This came out talking about these uncanny similarities of unique inserts in the 2019 nCoV spike protein that match the HIV glycoprotein. Now, we spoke about this in our previous interview, and you said that this wasn't necessarily genetic editing like CRISPR type stuff, but from cultivating these viruses on other mammalian cells. Is that the same kind of thing you're describing now?
Yeah, it's actually the Vero E6. That's a monkey kidney cells. The origin of HIV is simian immune deficiency virus, which is harmless to the monkeys, but in humans causes AIDS, can cause AIDS in a susceptible individual. This is the argument. So just by the manufacture in Vero E6 kidney cells, you can get that recombination event that puts that envelope, and that way it gives you the gain of function is that it infects now T and B cells and monocyte macrophages, the immune cells and the immune response in the blood. And so this extends, this is gaining the function where naturally a coronavirus wouldn't infect those cells. And we see that played out clinically, as I discussed earlier.
And so if I'm understanding you correctly from the layperson's standpoint, it's known that cultivating viruses in the course of vaccine research on mammalian cells can introduce viruses that affect other species into vaccines that are intended for humans, and this is making people sick in very serious ways, and that's known, but instead of figuring out some other way to make vaccines, Fauci is like hiring his wife to change the rules about ethics so that they can actually engineer viruses to do things that they don't do through their own natural evolution. Is that basically right?
Correct. This is accelerated evolution. And yes, the engineering takes place in the cell line so they can play this double speak of, no, we didn't do that. But again,
Jason,
yeah.
I'm going to make it even easier for you. Okay, so I'm a science teacher. I spent a summer at Lawrence Livermore Lab working in a virus lab, and the woman who headed up my division was named Crystal Zhang. Okay, and what she had done was she had taken a viral detection chip, and she had put the Rototech vaccine on that chip to see what was there. Okay, so that's a very common vaccine. It goes after diarrhea. That the diarrhea is a more common problem in undeveloped countries, but it's on our schedule as well. So when they put this vaccine on this viral detection chip, they found that there was an unexpected pig virus contaminating that vaccine. Okay, because some pig biological material was used in the development of it. And it was great because among a bunch of science teachers, there we were, they were doing the dog and pony show about all the wonderful things that Lawrence Livermore does. And the scientist was Dr. Paul Jackson, who's actually a great scientist. And so, stupid little me, I raise my hand and I say, Dr. Jackson, you talked about this pig virus contaminating the vaccine. Can you tell me how much more pig virus was in the vaccine rather than the target virus that you were searching for? Wow. And he said, well, there was 10 times more pig virus than the target virus. And I'd actually said, well, I understand you took the vaccine off the market for like a week or two, and then you put it back on. Since you've got this pig virus contaminating the vaccine, aren't you worried that we're going to find that it might lead to the development of cancers after 10, 20 years because viruses can cause cancer because they exhaust the immune system? And so he goes, yeah, it would be better if we did that, but I kind of got the feeling like he was actually saying, yeah, kid, shut up. You're smart. But that decision was made above my pay grade. And
Let me,
so
let me
right
ask
now,
Judy, if I may, Jason, I want to clear something up. You tell me if I'm wrong. In your affidavit, which you swore to under oath, which I'm going to get up on our website, I've given it to CNN to show them how false this whole thing is and others. And I've given it to Sinclair so they have it as well, and others. You state that you're not against all vaccines. You state that under oath, correct?
That's absolutely true, Larry, because the definition of a vaccine and the entire thesis of my 40-year career is that we can educate the immune system in order to prevent or treat chronic disease and infectious disease, that is cancer and viruses like AIDS. And I have developed those immune therapies, those vaccines for 40 years in different forms, not injected or anything else, but the immune therapies, including interleukin 2, interferons, and many other drugs. So yes, I am absolutely not vaccines. I've dedicated my life towards preventing and treating infectious disease by modulating the immune response.
Right, but the left smears you and defames you by saying you're against all vaccines and therefore you're a threat to the population, which is totally false. Now let's shift the subject a little bit because I know this interests Jason as well. We've talked about it. Is that here we have all these so-called vaccines being developed for COVID-19 in rapid fire. The Russians claim they have one already, okay? And they're claiming it's like Sputnik, okay? But what are the risks here if people take these vaccines without, long-term testing, number one? And of course, we face a situation, given the actions of governors and other government officials, where it may become mandatory that you take these vaccines. They're going to try to ram it down our throat because they think they have control and they have to serve the common good. Sound like Atlas Shrugged, the common good?
Yeah.
So this is an issue which I'd like to discuss, Jason, if have our experts discuss it, for the last 17 minutes of this show.
So there's a tremendous amount of risk, and I'm going to start with what Jason just mentioned and direct the audience to the foreword of our book written by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Because what he does is he goes back all the way to the 30s, SV40 virus, contaminants of other vaccines, including what Kent just said with respect to the pig viruses. There are pig retroviruses, and he shows, in fact, particularly with SV40 and other things, the cancers that are caused, is the disease that are caused, that we've known this for years, and yet because the liability was removed in 1986 by the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Act. And again, it was Tony Fauci standing next to then President Ronald Reagan saying, we won't make your vaccines and we'll have another H1N1 or another pandemic if you don't take away all liability from the manufacturers because vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. Well, they're not unavoidably unsafe, but now they don't have to clean them up. And that act has been corrupted over the last 2 decades, culminating in 2011, where a case known as Bruchewitz removed design defect. So I'll make that clear what I'm saying here with respect to Moderna. It'll just take me a second to get there. So up until 2011, you could sue if the manufacturer knew adventitious agents, contaminants, things in vaccine could and did cause harm. This is exactly what our paper in 2009 Science said, that they not only were they there, but they had been transmitted to humans. That's very important. They were now infectious and transmissible, however they develop. And the last thing is, if they then knew that they had caused harm, just as we learned HIV when it contaminated the blood supply, was the governments have to pay liability and trillions of dollars of liability. And Hillary Johnson wrote this in the foreword to our book Plague, the title of which, A Disease to Affect the Economy of Nations, able to affect the economy. And this is what it becomes about, if 6% of America. So what the government has done has said, we know in the case of what Kent just said, the pig virus is in the Rototec vaccines. We know these that adventitious agents are there. But what they publish in the literature is they don't cause disease. Now you've got one that, they're purporting to cause disease, and it really is everything else. And I think it's really clear to keep going back. So how does that weigh on the Moderna vaccine or any other vaccine? When you inject, and with these RNA, these toxic particles containing the adjuvants, we're not allowed to see the content, so I can't tell you the extent of the injury. But what you are going to do is wake from dormancy and spread the infection through the bodies, the XMRVs in those 25 million Americans, HIV, and I don't know how many million Americans affected with HIV at this point in time. So those people will, those vaccines, just by the very nature, any vaccine will drive that infection, and as I said earlier, will cause them disease or even death. So that these things are mandated. Same things happen with the mask and the oxidative stress and the immune suppression. You will drive the disease that is now being called post-viral COVID-19. No, it's chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis, inflammation of the brain and spinal cord caused by infections, including, not limited to, but including XMRVs. So patients with chronic Lyme disease, Borrelia, Babesia, parasites, we see that by the treatments. Why is an anti-parasitic drug important? Because those cell lines are infected with a whole lot more than viruses. They carry parasites, bacteria, including Babesia, Borrelia, mold, mycoplasma. So the amount of chronic disease and upper respiratory disease we are driving and then calling COVID-19 by the measures put in place by Dr. Fauci, knowing very well who are the first to die, knowing very well, along with Drs. Redfield and Burke, who also know this and whose crimes go back to the 1990s, where they tested an experimental HIV vaccine on the military, first responders, and lab workers, destroying the lives of many, many people.
Now there's another irony here, if I may just put this in here for people to talk about, Jason, is that Judy sent me an article recently about a leftist that was attacking her, claiming, she was against all vaccines and this and that. She went through the history of how the government removed liability from big pharma, from the pharmaceutical manufacturers, and how the government then stepped in through these arbitration panels and courts to pay damages from the vaccines. What I found very interesting is that 80% of the claims that are made for vaccines that harm people, 80% are actually paid out by the government. So if what she's saying is not true, then why is the government paying out 80% of the time to people that are making claims?
Seems high, Larry. What's the percentage of non-vaccine injury lawsuits that get successfully settled like that? I mean, can't be 80%. It's got to be like 51%, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very high percentage. So, we really need, a discussion here before people are led down the primrose path to their own destruction. She's not saying everybody's going to die from the vaccine. She's saying that there's a significant minority portion of the population that you give it to them, and it'll cause, I'm talking like a layman, like a lawyer, a chain reaction that'll result in severe health harm or death. And that
And
needs to be
if
discussed.
I can chime in here, I think that, and correct me, Judy, because I want to make sure I get this story right. So let me just set it up and then you take it. As I understand it, there seems to be something unique about the coronavirus itself, because normally when you're exposed to a virus, you develop antibodies, and then if you're re-exposed, those antibodies will help you. But after the experience in 2011 with SARS, they started developing SARS vaccines. They gave it to monkeys. They detected the appropriate antibody response, and then they reinfected those monkeys. And instead of the monkeys being protected, they died. That there was a cytokine storm. Do you know much about that story, Judy? And can you speak to that?
Yeah, I know a lot about that story, not necessarily only in monkeys, but from our experience in vaccine court. So what happens with the XMRVs, our research showed, is it cripples the B cell, the antibody producing cell responses. And so 13% of America actually has what's called, because of their disease, common variable immune deficiency. They can't make certain subclasses of antibodies. Also, the cells crippled by the XMRVs are the plasmacytoid dendritic cells. Sorry, I can't think of another term to say that people would understand. That make 97% of your type 1, your alpha interferon, and your beta interferon, which are critical for clearing SARS-CoV-2. So again, the only thing in that needle, or the only thing that is in that, that there's not one virus. SARS-CoV-2 pathogens rarely travel alone. So where this virus, the origin of this virus in that cell line is critical, because as I asserted, I think when we talked the last time, Jason, and Larry and I have talked about, the flu vaccine clearly drives coronavirus infections, and the most severely infected have been vaccinated for influenza, both in Italy, where the dog vaccine Flucavax was used, that had maiden Darby kidney cells, which is a dog cell line. Lots of coronaviruses in dogs, but lots of coronaviruses in chicken eggs. And again, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny and I discussed that in detail with slides. Very interesting slides she pulled up, and data that she pulled up. But what's important about, what Larry just said a minute ago with respect to our assertions and everything else is that it's not one thing in that needle. And in fact, in pandemic, what I was attacked about more than anything is even suggesting that flu vaccines drove SARS-CoV-2. And this is before we even get to a coronavirus vaccine. The government is pushing, if not mandating, vaccines on children returning to school. They're harboring those latent, silenced, dormant viruses they've been injected with since birth. And now you're going to wake them up with the mask, and you're going to inject them, and the injured know better than to get inoculated again. You're going to inject them, and you're going to drive the disease through the school because you're wearing masks. The masks don't stop the spread of the virus. The masks make you sick. My mask makes me sick, your mask makes you sick, and no mask prevents the spread of the disease. So this is going to be a nightmare, and that's why Kent and I just wrote the third book, The Case Against the Mask, why the use of masks is limited, because it's immune suppressive, it's oxidative suppressive. Those big flying rats need a lot of metabolism, and the very most injured, why Larry filed this lawsuit against Governor Newsom June 23rd, is because my husband and I both have lung disease. He's 82 with COPD. He's the most likely to die, and yet we're denied our basic rights of walking in a store and buying a bottle of water or walking outside. We're imprisoned in our home, and again, that's our basic human rights.
Unbelievable. You know, it's so shocking, Dr. Mikovits. And so when you hear things coming from people like Alan Dershowitz talking about, he's basically advocating for these mandatory vaccines. He came on this show and he told me he wanted to go to the Supreme Court and argue in favor of a mandatory vaccine. Now, I'm not a lawyer, as you know, Larry, but what the hell does Alan Dershowitz know about anything medical, and why do we want him arguing for us to have to be injected with an mRNA vaccine that hasn't been tested, has never been used on humans before, and is intended to actually send messages to our cells that are going to change the genetic material that the cells are producing? Isn't this extremely dangerous, Dr. Mikovits?
Absolutely, extremely dangerous. And I think Bobby Kennedy Jr. in the recent debate with Dershowitz literally gave him food for thought when Mr. Dershowitz said, well, my doctor gives me these vaccines in every year. So you're telling me the flu vaccine and the pneumonia vaccines, and you're telling me not to get it. And what Bobby said was, no, I'm telling you to do your homework and your doctor to do your homework about the dangers these vaccines provide. And then if, again, this mRNA COVID-19 vaccine is rolled out, the synergy of the injuries is going to be Mr. Dershowitz said he was 82 years old, the same age as my husband turned on Sunday. And again, I think it gave him pause where he thought, uh-oh, I'm the one that will die. Do I really want to risk it? So I think the message is getting across, and largely because people are waking up. People saw the discrepancies. People are recognizing what we're saying. Thanks to Kent, our books are having an impact because people can understand not only that masks don't do any good, nor do vaccines do any good, and they haven't been tested. The synergies haven't been tested like we test cancer drugs. Every time you add a drug to a protocol, you have to test it alone and in combination. So nothing on the schedule satisfies that, and no flu vaccine ever satisfied that because they add different strains every year, and they don't manufacture them together, and it's critical.
See, so even though Alan Dershowitz is against us, we're trying to save his life, Jason. Okay? So,
speak for yourself.
Alan, we're trying to help you. We want you to live longer. You're usually so smart, okay? But you're totally, quite honestly, he didn't do his homework. For God's sakes, go to a simple insert. Read the list of ingredients. Read the animal tissue. If you want to know if there's human tissue in there, I'll give you a little help. MRC5, WI38. So you'll see those numbers in some vaccines. That's human tissue. So think about how it's breaching the blood barrier, okay? We're designed, I think, to eat animals. That's fine. We chew, we have acids. It goes through this big process. We're not meant to inject animals or dead babies into our bloodstream. That's crazy talk. So this is the discussion that they don't want to have, because we're going to, if we're listened to, this is going to destroy a big part of Big Pharma's, business.
And the other problem is, Kent, is that, look, I like the president. I support him. We need to educate him. He's a world better, I say this personally, than Biden, who's brain dead. Maybe he took a vaccine at some point and something happened bad. But the reality is these vaccines are being pushed for political reasons.
Absolutely, 100%.
The way the president can say, I'm doing something, I'm saving you, etc., and he won't be saving anybody if there isn't adequate research done and adequate vaccines produced. And Judy's not saying no vaccine. She's saying, we have to have vaccines done and created in the correct way.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, and Kent, I agree with everything that you've said so far, except that Alan Dershowitz is usually very smart. I think he's a guy who is very practiced at convincing people of facts as he sees them, and I think that something like that is going on right here, because when Dr. Mikovits tells us about, and of course Robert Kennedy has spoken at great length about the Vaccine Injury Act, the indemnification of these biological and pharmaceutical companies, and we seem to be hearing the same exact thing again right now. We've got big media suppressing facts and scientific data, as Dr. Mikovits is presenting, and it's amazing how they're talking about how great Moderna and its stock are doing while simultaneously playing long segments and lots of coverage for people like Bill Gates, who want to convince us that the only way we'll get back to normal is if these vaccines can be mandatory, some chip can be injected in our hand, and just like they won't let me into the bank right now and they won't let me into the Whole Foods right now, I have a feeling once that chip becomes widespread, I might not be able to get onto an airplane without that chip. I'm not going to be able to go anywhere.
Yeah,
And why is Bill Gates telling us that he wants to give us this vaccine, but he wants indemnification for it?
Right.
I mean, he's almost the world's richest man, maybe. And I'm sorry, he gets a pass if he hurts anybody. No.
Well, not only that, apparently we purchased in advance all of these vaccines. We don't even know what the vaccines are yet, but taxpayer money is being used to purchase millions, hundreds of millions of doses of these vaccines. I mean, that's insane. We're already bankrupt as it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we want to go under for the count finally, economically, by doling out more money for a vaccine we don't know that's going to work or is safe.
I got a question for all members of the panel. I feel like we might right now be in the most dangerous moment in the history of this country. Dr. Judy, what do you think?
Absolutely. It's what keeps me up at night and why I just keep talking, because I look at my granddaughter born May 20th and that my 5-year-old grandson we had dinner with last night, and I can't imagine their future if these things are forced upon them.
Well, and couple that with the domestic terrorists in the streets, the ultra left, the anarchists, the radical atheists, the radical of every single group, trying to destroy this country and capitalizing on the fact that we're on our back. We're not just on our knees, we're on our back. And we have yet to see the worst, I think. I hate to be, Debbie Downer, so to speak, but what happens if a foreign power tries to take advantage of us, Iran or North Korea or Russia or China even more? I mean, we are wounded right now, and we're extremely vulnerable. So we better get our act together. The president better get his act together. I say that in a loving way because he hasn't had his act together. And we need to get Judy into the White House with Kent to talk to him. I'm going to send this video to Donald Jr. and others. I hope that it'll be given to the president to watch. He needs to snap out of it.
I am excited by this moment in history. I think that this is just a fantastic time. I think people are waking up. And, I either end up in the Oval Office or military prison. So,
it's an all or nothing kind of a scenario. Well, I mean, there's so much to be said about this. I just don't. It's very disconcerting, and I know a lot of our viewers are concerned. Is there anything else that we want to cover?
I think the most important thing to know is that Dr. Judy what she says all the time is that there are therapies out there that we're not allowed to use, almost like hydroxychloroquine, okay?
Right.
Simple things that we could do, that if we told the truth, we could quickly deploy these things. I'm always asking Judy, how quickly could we turn things around? And she'll say, like, tomorrow, 6 months, a year. Simple. We know what to do. This stuff is out there. The science has been done. It's just forbidden from being used, like hydroxychloroquine.
Let me tell you what Judy told me. She says, take a lot of vitamin C, get a lot of sunlight, and take some vitamin D, and keep your immune system up to fight it off.
Yeah.
And that's a very simple thing you can do.
And there is one more thing I meant to ask you about that I almost forgot, because there's a similar circumstance that just came about maybe yesterday or the other day where we had basically a convention of doctors. These are medical professionals, scientists who are in the field who show up, and they are sharing important information, and yet we see this this is a conspiracy. We've got multiple major media outlets and big tech giants conspiring to suppress this message. But of course, if I call them conspirators, I'm a conspiracy theorist. Dr. Mikovits, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I saw part of that tape on Monday, I believe, and yeah, the doctor was absolutely right, and it's what Larry and Kent just said. We, with the experience, we who know what saves, 40 years, interferon alpha could have prevented all of this. You could protect 1,000 people a week with a $600 vial of interferon alpha, which Merck took off the market, which the FDA stopped from being used 40 years ago to prevent coronaviruses from jumping into other species, from jumping species. So yes, you can only decide that this is planned when therapies that are out there that cost essentially nothing. Oh, there's a problem. There's no patent. We did this work starting in 1980. Low dose. There are so many solutions, and yet the FDA prevents anyone from getting them, and then the AMA or the doctors associations destroy doctors who practice, and I guess the FDA is a part of that, and use things off label. As I said once before, I discovered it. I'll use it any way I want, and I take these products myself. But others have to make a living. I've long since stopped making a living, so does it really matter to me? I have nothing left to lose, and I'm going to protect my family and friends and anybody who listens.
And
Absolutely.
Judy can tell you. I don't know how much time we have, Jason, but how the FDA prevented people that got AIDS and HIV from being cured. I mean, there's a movie about it with Matthew McConaughey. Okay, it's clear that they basically favor big pharma so they can make big profits and don't let the people get what they need. And the president's made reference to that, but then he's also made reference on the other side of the coin to the fact that the FDA is in charge of this whole thing. I mean, God forbid that they're the only entity that's in charge of this. I used to represent the FDA when I was a Justice Department lawyer. It's the most powerful agency in government. They can go into your house, they can go into your business, they can seize whatever they want at any time.
Wow.
Don't even need a warrant. Okay, so this is a dangerous agency that's not kept under check, and the president should keep a close watch on the FDA.
That is amazing. Just one more thing on the doctors' convention at the Supreme Court. One of the doctors, I believe, challenged Anthony Fauci to take a urine test to prove that he's not using hydroxychloroquine in a prophylactic manner. What'd you think of that?
Well, I missed that, but that sounds fabulous. Let's.
I love it.
Well, it's really been an honor to have each of you here. I think it's very important for people to purchase the book, Plague of Corruption. We definitely want to support Dr. Mikovits and Kent in what they're doing, trying to educate everyone about the science behind all this. This is not a conspiracy theory. We've got the limited group of people here who are actually speaking about scientific evidence and research and things that make sense rather than the conspiracy theory that putting on a mask and locking yourself inside your home is going to prevent the spread of this disease. It does seem remarkable to me that they almost anticipated this second wave, and I've just reminded myself of a very important point that I wanted to raise. Early in the conversation, Dr. Mikovits, you spoke about Fort Detrick and how it was criticized for somehow being contaminated or something, and when you said that, you're kind of crossing over, at least with the news of it, crossing over into my world where social engineers like to inject these false stories. What's the real story about what was going on at Fort Detrick?
Well, the real story is since the since the 90s and even earlier, Fort Detrick has been culturing many animal tissues, bat tissues, the Ebola outbreaks, even Zika outbreaks, weaponizing mosquitoes and other things. This has clearly happened at Fort Detrick. And in fact, in late 2018 and early 2019, that USAMRIID biosafety level 4 facility was actually shut down for safety issues. So how many viruses were released? So it's pretty easy to predict a second wave when you know there are lots of strains of coronaviruses that they can blame and play the same game over and over again. And the Wuhan facility was also shut down for safety violations. So I mean, I've been working with the cell line since at that facility since the mid '90s. I did the work there, and again, it's correlated with the release of the most pathogenic Ebola of all time, which in 2014 killed 21,000 people in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and in fact, that virus was shown to be aerosolized. Ebola had never spread through the air before, at least to our knowledge. So now it's spread the same way as XMRVs. We've got contagious cancer, we've got contagious coronaviruses that infect white blood cells as well, gain of function, and we've got contagious Ebola. It's a recipe for disaster, and you can project wave after wave after wave. And the only way people will prevent it is to take off the mask, take back their rights, and never, ever get a single shot until they're cleaned up, until they're made safe. That's it. We have that right as humans, but we will lose that very soon if we don't act now.
Wow. And wasn't there, you mentioned anthrax coming from Fort Detrick as well. Wasn't there some innovation with sabotage spore powder that somehow made anthrax aerosol as well? Is this something they're just doing, making dangerous viruses airborne?
Yeah, well, or releasing them. And in that case, I should mention and condolences to the family of Dr. Bruce Irvin, who was actually suicided, murdered, blamed for the release of the anthrax into the mail and in 2001. Good man, knew the family. Again, he was put in that position that the chapter about the scientists who are murdered or suicided, and when they find out and refuse to renounce the truth. So it's a dangerous game, as we know.
One thing, Jason, that needs to be kept in mind is that, I love this country and we want this country to be the best it can be. But correct me if I'm wrong, Judy. I mean, it's not just that Fort Detrick tries to come up with antidotes to pandemics and also bioweapons, but the United States, like other countries, also creates bioweapons. And that's, in effect, what happened with regard to this anthrax. And it gets out. And then George Bush, the dad, gives it to Saddam Hussein to use against the Iranians when there was a war. We were backing the Sunnis in Iraq at the time because the Ayatollahs had kidnapped our entire embassy. And it gets out. And then the FBI can't solve the crime, or at least they didn't want to solve the crime. And they blame two people, a guy named Stephen Hatfield and this guy Ivins, for it. They set him up just like they did Richard Jewell in Atlanta. I mean, This is an outrage. Our government set these people up, and this poor guy Ivins, was so distraught that he killed himself.
Well, and I should say our book, the first chapter, Scientists at Sea, our families are threatened. I was threatened. I was set up, and I was going to take the fall for the XMRVs. But God has a sense of humor, and fortunately we had a small boat and we escaped. So the arrest, why the false arrest was engineered, and again, this is all the Washington Post or the New York Times or Science, the journal, who actually participated in the defamation and destruction of my career with their insider opinion articles. So they told everybody what to believe about what I supposedly did when I refused to renounce the data. I can tell you, in those 5 days in jail, and when they came to my house November 9th, 2011, I should have and would have been dead. But for the fact I don't have children, I don't have family. Bruce Irvin had a number of children, a wife. They couldn't threaten my husband. He's a man of courage, and so they had nothing against us. us. And of course, I didn't so much as have a parking ticket on November 18th of 2011.
What she's talking about is that apparently without, a warrant, without probable cause, they came in and arrested Judy to shut her up, to keep her quiet. And I guess you were in prison for about 5 days or so, and eventually.
I was held in jail without bail, without an opportunity for bail, with no warrant, no crime behind, a felony fugitive from justice. That was actually published in Science Insider, November 19th, 2011, by John Cohen, an article which said, we don't know. There was no warrant issued by Ventura where I lived and was taken from my home. You can't be a fugitive from justice if you're not running and you're in your home, literally having been on the beach. So when you see how the arrest was carried out, there was no warrant except for one of the federal agencies. So this is the basis for the assertions that I've made. And in fact, there was no warrant. There was no basis for the felony fugitive from justice. I was then forced to go to Reno, Nevada, and turn myself in for possession of stolen property, when on the fourth day, my husband David was extorted by Harvey Whittemore, called on the phone and say, find the notebooks or you never see her again. I was under a bail hold, and he went back in the house, and of course, he found them, and unfortunately, he didn't make a copy of them. In 2 a.m, he hurriedly ran down to the police and turned them in, where they were directly given to Harvey Whittemore, not to any lawyer, not to anything.
Who do you think was behind this, Judy? Who do you think instigated your being arrested?
One of the things that I think is critical is I've been on this story for 10 years now. And so through the whole Russia collusion hoax, through what General Flynn has gone through, I think the American public has been educated about how our judicial system can be manipulated. And all I can say is when I look at what happened to, General Flynn, George Papadopoulos, others, the echoes of Dr. Mikovits' story are all through there. So the misuse of the judicial system, and that's why I'm so thrilled that Larry is now representing Judy, because I think that while she may have had adequate representation, if she'd had a normal problem, it takes an attorney of Larry's caliber to understand, the machine that we're really up against. And so that's why all of that evidence that we're talking about is in our 2 books, Plague. It's detailed down to, I think that probably has like 600 footnotes in it about what happened to her and why it was wrong legally and why it was wrong scientifically. So for the media out there who just attacks Judy without having read our books, they're lazy, they don't do their homework. Everything that Judy says is backed up by data and by evidence and footnotes. So anybody who wants to know her story, it's in our 2 books. And, we've been saying these things, in print since 2014. That's what really kind of gets me is, when we published in 2014, nobody said a word. It was like, even though the book was, a good seller, it continued to sell well, it sold so well that, they put it in paperback. And, if you don't sell enough hardbacks, they don't give you a paperback. So everything about Judy's story, I've been able to document meticulously. Dr. Mikovits is a remarkable documentarian of her own history. I mean, I can ask her for something from 12 years ago, and I'll get it in like 5 minutes. So everything is in there, and I just, what I've worked so hard to do is to simplify the story so that the average reader could read it. Recently, we had somebody who was just a high school graduate who wrote Dr. Mikovits and said, I think I understand the story, and gave it to her in 3 or 4 sentences. And Judy says, yep, you got it.
Yeah. I just wrote a book too. It's called "It Takes a Revolution: Forget the Scandal Industry." Okay, and it's interesting. You can pre-order it. I'll do a little advertisement on Barnes and Noble, Amazon, etc. And it's how you wage a peaceful and legal revolution, because we're at that point right now. Yeah. But in that context, what's really interesting, because Judy was attacked by the Washington Post as well as CNN. They're going to get theirs as well legally, Bezos and everybody else. And what was really, I found humorous, I started laughing, is that they actually defended Donald Trump in the article by saying that I had suggested that the reason Trump was going light on China, on communist China, was because he must have gotten intelligence briefings that we actually gave the seeds of the coronavirus, COVID-19, to the Chinese. And they're actually defending Trump to get to her. I mean, they hate Trump. They want him destroyed, but they'll do anything because, you see, they understand that Fauci is their Mohammed, that this is the way they can bring the economy down and the country down and get him out of office and seize control of the nation.
Wow. It's an alarming story, and I think it's something that we just cannot stop talking about and exposing because it's really got us all in jeopardy. There's nothing else to be said about that. This is changing the world that we live in. It's changing the nature of the country that we all love so much. So it's very important for people to visit freedomwatchusa.org. Support Freedom Watch as they defend Dr. Mikovits. She's got a very important legal battle ahead of her. And as Kent was saying, this is something that unfortunately has become all too common now, the abuse of the criminal justice system to suppress people that do not want to go along with the story. I'm sure, Dr. Mikovits, that they had similar plans for you when you were talking to us about Dr. Irvin and these anthrax letters. It's much easier for them if you just disappear rather than doing as you are, which is bravely sounding the alarm and letting all of us know what's really going on. I have to thank each of you so much for joining me today. Is there anything you'd like to say before we go, Dr. Mikovits?
Just thank you, Jason, for this, because we ask, people ask me, what's your motive? And it's not money, it's not anything. It's those 25 million Americans, including Kent's daughter and Kent's family, who are most at risk and who've already lost enough. So made a promise to Kent that we'd do our best to get to heal his family and to the rest of those patients, who really lost everything. So I have no other motive. I'd really rather just hang out and be retired with my husband and go to the beach. But, God has other ideas, and I just trust God.
And when you see a picture like this, I'm sure that's all the motive that you really need. What kind of a world is this child being born into? He even looks like he's a bit annoyed by the look on his face to have that mask on. Kent, any final words?
I just think that this is such an exciting time because people are waking up. Dr. Mikovits' message is getting out there. I mean, the fact that our book was a New York Times bestseller, the fact that the Plandemic video has more than 1 billion views. People are hungry for the truth, and as long as God allows us the ability to speak, we're going to keep speaking.
Absolutely.
And I believe the same thing, Jason, is that he in the end will lead us through this, but we're in for some very rough sledding, and that silent majority that's out there that's been silent with regard to what's going on with COVID-19, with regard to these domestic terrorists that are trying to destroy our country, with regard to the fake news media that's assisting them in doing it, with regard to the deep state, which has many different tentacles, with regard to the court jesters on Capitol Hill that accomplish little to nothing other than stuffing money into their own pockets, and with regard to our judiciary, who are selected by and large by establishments of both political parties and don't have the courage that what needs to be done to actually address these matters, is that this country has a lesson, and that's that we, the people, must rise up. We, the people, must save our country with God's grace.
Absolutely, Larry. And thank you for doing what you're doing in defending Dr. Mikovits. I hope that people will visit freedomwatchusa.org and help Larry stand up for Dr. Mikovits. Also, it's important for people to purchase the book. Money is not the motivation, but of course, we do need money to compete and to stay alive with these incredibly powerful forces. I want to thank my panel of distinguished guests today. And I want to remind our viewers that I can't bring you shows like this without your support. I don't have a giant corporate sponsor, so please go to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become a sponsor of the show. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and thanks everybody for watching. I'll see everyone tomorrow.
Thank you, Jason.
All right, thanks.